My son Cory looked me straight in the eye and said, "Mom, maybe it's time you found your own place." I nodded, smiled, and walked upstairs to pack. 3 weeks later, I was sipping Chianti on the terrace of my 8-bedroom villa overlooking the rolling hills of Tuscany, while he was frantically calling about the eviction notice on what used to be our family home. My name is Grace Woodall, though everyone's called me Gracie since I was 5 years old and declared I could fix anything that was broken if people would just give me the right tools.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're a subscriber, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Tell us a duh.
52 years later, I was still fixing things, just never for myself. I stood in the doorway of what had been my sewing room for the past 8 months, watching my daughter-in-law Alicia arrange her extensive skincare collection across the antique dresser that had belonged to my great-grandmother. The morning light caught the expensive glass bottles and silver containers, creating little prisms on the wallpaper I'd hung myself 28 years ago, when Cory was still bringing home spelling tests instead of entitled demands. "Morning, Gracie," Alicia chirped without looking up from her reflection. She was applying some sort of serum that probably cost more than my monthly electric bill. Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows were being shaped with tweezers that looked more like surgical instruments. Everything about Alicia was calculated. Her auburn hair fell in deliberate waves that took an hour to achieve each morning. Her athleisure clothes bore Italian designer labels, and even her casual smile seemed rehearsed for maximum effect. "Good morning, sweetheart," I replied, stepping into the room that used to house my quilting frame and fabric collection. Those had been relocated to the garage months ago when Cory announced that he and Alicia needed space while they searched for their dream home. That was 22 months ago. "I was thinking," Alicia continued, now applying mascara with the precision of a Renaissance painter, "we should probably discuss the living arrangements here." My chest tightened, but I kept my voice steady. "Oh, what about them?" She turned then, her hazel eyes meeting mine in the ornate mirror. "Well, Cory and I have been talking, and we think it might be time for some adjustments. We're not newlyweds anymore, you know. We need our space to flourish as a family unit." I gripped the doorframe a little tighter. "Of course. Have you found a place you'd like to move to?" Alicia's laugh was like crystal bells in a tornado, pretty but with an edge that could cut. "Oh, Gracie, you're so sweet. No, we were thinking more along the lines of, well, this is Cory's childhood home, right? His inheritance, technically. And you've had such a wonderful run here. But maybe it's time you found your own little space. Something more manageable for a woman at your stage of life." The words hit me like ice water. A woman at my stage of life? I was 70, not 90, and I'd maintained this 6-bedroom Victorian with its wraparound porch and prize-winning gardens for 32 years. I'd restored every original fixture, refinished every piece of crown molding, and nursed every rosebush back to health when winter tried to claim them. "This is my home, Alicia," I said quietly. "Well, technically," she stood up, smoothing her designer leggings that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "It's in Cory's name now, isn't it, since the transfer after your husband died?" My throat closed. She was right. After Thomas's sudden stroke 7 years ago, the grief had been so overwhelming that when Cory suggested transferring the house to his name for estate planning purposes and to simplify things, I'd signed the papers without much thought. He was my only child, my pride and joy, and I trusted him completely. "I just think," Alicia continued, now applying lip balm with the same methodical precision, "it would be healthier for everyone if you found your own space. Something smaller, more appropriate. There are some lovely retirement communities nearby with organized activities." Retirement communities? The phrase made my skin crawl. I wasn't ready for scheduled craft time and 4:30 dinner service. I still taught pottery classes at the community center, maintained a garden that had been featured in Southern Living magazine, and volunteered at the literacy center every Monday and Wednesday. "Where is Cory?" I asked. "Shower," she replied, capping her lip balm with a decisive click. "But we've already discussed this extensively, Gracie. He's in complete agreement. It's time for a change." I stood there for another moment, watching her adjust her workout top in the mirror, completely comfortable in my bedroom, in my house, discussing my future like I was a piece of outdated furniture that no longer matched the decor. I walked downstairs to the kitchen, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floors I'd had professionally restored just 3 years ago. The morning sun streamed through the bay windows above the breakfast nook, illuminating the herb garden I'd planted in matching terracotta pots along the windowsill. Basil, oregano, rosemary, sage, all thriving under my careful attention. The coffee maker gurgled to life as I pressed the start button, the sound as familiar as my own heartbeat. This kitchen had been the soul of our family for over 3 decades. I'd prepared thousands of meals here, packed countless school lunches, hosted birthday celebrations and holiday gatherings. The small dents in the butcher block island told stories of dropped pans and hurried preparations. The height marks on the pantry door charted Cory's growth from toddler to the man who now wanted me gone. "Morning, Mom." I turned to find Cory in the doorway, hair still damp from the shower, wearing the expensive casual clothes that seemed to be his uniform these days. At 37, he'd inherited his father's broad shoulders and my determined chin. But somewhere along the way, he'd also developed an entitlement I didn't recognize and couldn't understand. "Morning, honey." I poured 2 cups of coffee, adding cream to his, just the way he'd liked it since he was 14 and I first let him try a full cup. "Sleep well?" "Yeah, thanks." He accepted the mug but avoided my eyes. "Listen, Mom, Alicia mentioned she talked to you about the living situation." I nodded, taking a careful sip of my coffee. It was perfect, rich and smooth from beans I ordered from a small roaster in North Carolina. Another small luxury I allowed myself. "She's right, you know," Cory continued, leaning against the counter I'd had custom built when he was in high school. "This place is getting too much for you to handle alone." "I handle it just fine," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the tremor starting in my chest. "Mom, come on." Cory set down his coffee mug with more force than necessary. "The roof needs attention, the gutters are backing up, and don't even get me started on maintaining 6 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms. It's unrealistic for someone your age." Someone your age? The same phrase Alicia had used, like 70 was synonymous with helpless. Like I hadn't just climbed a ladder last weekend to clean those gutters myself, or negotiated with 3 different contractors for the roof estimate, or deep cleaned every room in this house 2 weeks ago when Alicia's parents visited unannounced. "I maintain this house perfectly well," I said, my voice still calm but with steel creeping in. "The roof will be repaired next month by Henderson & Sons, the same company your father used for 20 years. The gutters were cleaned professionally last week. I have a maintenance schedule that served me well for 3 decades. Cory shifted uncomfortably, running his hand through his hair, a nervous habit from childhood that reminded me he was still, somewhere inside, the little boy who used to help me plant bulbs in the front garden. "It's not just about the maintenance," he said, his tone softening into what I recognized as his practiced persuasion voice. "It's about you having a social life, being around people your own age. Alicia and I need space to start planning our family, and honestly, Mom, living with your mother-in-law isn't exactly the environment we want for that." Planning their family. They'd been married for 3 years and had been planning since before the wedding. But it was easier to blame my presence than examine why they kept postponing the children they claimed to want. "This house has 6 bedrooms," I pointed out, "plenty of space for a family." "Mom." His tone was the same one he'd used as a teenager when he thought I was being unreasonably old-fashioned. "We're adults. We can't live with my mother forever." "Then move out," I said simply. He stared at me like I'd suggested he'd jump off a bridge. "Move out? Mom, this is my house now, my inheritance. Dad left it to me." "Dad left it to both of us," I corrected firmly. "I transferred it to your name for tax purposes and estate planning. There's a significant legal difference." Cory's jaw tightened, and for a moment I saw something in his expression that reminded me uncomfortably of his father during his worst moments. Thomas had been a good man, but he'd had a stubborn streak when things didn't go according to his plans.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Look, Cory said, beginning to pace the kitchen like a caged animal. We've been more than patient. We've lived here for almost 2 years, contributing to expenses, helping with upkeep. Contributing to expenses? They'd bought groceries exactly 4 times since moving in, and had never once offered to help with the mortgage, property taxes, utilities, or the 1,000 small costs that came with maintaining a historic home. I'd been too proud to ask, and too grateful for the company to demand it. The sound of heels clicking on hard wood announced Alicia's entrance. She'd changed into what she called her errand outfit, designer jeans that cost more than most people's monthly car payment, and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my quarterly property tax bill. "How's the conversation going?" she asked brightly, as if discussing my displacement was as casual as planning a grocery run. "We're working through the details," Cory said, shooting me a look that clearly communicated I should be more cooperative. "Wonderful!" Alicia clapped her hands together like she was applauding a particularly good performance. "I've already been researching options, Gracie. There's this amazing place called Sunset Hills about 20 minutes from here. It's like a resort, but for active seniors. They have fitness classes, book clubs, organized trips to theaters and museums. You'd love it." Active seniors. She made it sound like a special category of human being, separate from the rest of the population. People who needed activities organized for them because they'd lost the capacity to create their own entertainment. "And the best part," Alicia continued, settling into the breakfast nook like she was delivering wonderful news, "is that they handle all the maintenance. No more worrying about leaky faucets or yard work. You could just relax and enjoy your golden years." Golden years, another phrase that made me want to scream, as if life was divided into distinct metals, and I'd somehow been demoted from the productive silver years to the decorative, useless gold ones. "I don't want to relax," I said quietly. "I want to live." Alicia's perfectly contoured face arranged itself into an expression of patient sympathy. "Of course you do, sweetie, but living looks different at different stages of life. You've earned the right to take it easy." Take it easy. Let other people handle the challenging parts while I sat in a chair and waited for the next organized activity. The thought made my skin crawl. "What if I said no?" I asked, looking directly at my son. "What if I said I don't want to move to Sunset Hills or anywhere else? What if I said this is my home and I'm staying?" The silence that followed was so thick I could almost touch it. Cory and Alicia exchanged a look, one of those married couple communications that happens without words. I'd shared thousands of those looks with Thomas over the years, but these felt different, calculating, strategic. "Mom," Cory said finally, his voice taking on the tone he used with difficult clients at his real estate firm. "I really hope it doesn't come to that. I'm trying to handle this reasonably, as a family. But legally speaking, this house is mine now. I'd prefer to do this cooperatively, but if you're going to be difficult about it—" He didn't finish the sentence, but the threat hung in the air like smoke from a fire that hadn't been properly extinguished. My own son was threatening to evict me from the house where I'd raised him, loved him, sacrificed for him. "I see," I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. "We're not trying to be harsh," Alicia added quickly, her tone sickeningly sweet. "We just think this transition would be easier if everyone was on the same page. You'd have your own space, your own life, and we could start building our future without feeling like we're intruding on yours." Intruding on mine. The irony was so sharp I could taste copper. They'd intruded on my life, my space, my routines, my peace. They'd moved into my home and immediately begun planning how to remove me from it. "How long do I have?" I asked. Relief flooded both their faces like I'd just agreed to something reasonable instead of my own banishment. "We were thinking end of February," Cory said. "That gives you 6 weeks to look at places and make arrangements. Alicia found an interior designer who can start updating the house in March." 6 weeks. It was mid-January. They were giving me less than 2 months to uproot my entire life so they could redecorate my house according to Alicia's minimalist aesthetic. That should be plenty of time, I said calmly. You're the best, Mom, Cory said, his relief palpable. I knew you'd understand. And hey, maybe this is exactly what you need. A fresh start, independence. Independence. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. I'd been independent my entire adult life. I'd raised him mostly alone while Thomas worked 60-hour weeks building his construction company. I'd managed household finances, maintained property, and built a life I was proud of. Now they were telling me I needed independence while simultaneously making me homeless. I should probably start looking at places today, I said, standing up from the breakfast nook where we'd shared thousands of family meals over the years. Great idea, Alicia beamed. Want me to call Sunset Hills for you? Set up a tour? No, thank you. I'll handle it myself. Cory kissed my cheek like nothing had changed, like he hadn't just dismantled my life over morning coffee. Love you, Mom. Love you too, sweetheart. I watched them leave, Cory to his real estate office where he helped other families find their dream homes, Alicia to her yoga class where she'd spend an hour perfecting poses that cost more than most people's monthly rent. They moved through my house like they already owned it completely, which legally they did, but emotionally felt like theft. The next few days passed in a strange blur of normalcy. They went about their routines, gym sessions, dinner dates with friends, weekend trips to wine country, while I maintained the house they were planning to steal from me. I cooked their meals, did their laundry, and listened to them discuss renovation plans like I was already gone. I'm thinking we'll knock out the wall between the dining room and kitchen, Alicia said over dinner Tuesday night, gesturing with her fork toward the wall that separated 2 rooms I'd carefully designed and decorated. Open concept is so much more modern. That wall is load-bearing, I said quietly. You'd need structural engineering. We'll figure it out, Cory replied dismissively. The whole downstairs needs updating anyway. All this traditional stuff is so dated. Dated. The antique sideboard that had been in Thomas's family for 4 generations, the handcrafted dining table we'd bought from a local artisan when Cory was 12, the built-in china cabinet where I displayed dishes that told the story of our family's celebrations and traditions. By Friday, I'd reached my limit. I was arranging flowers in the front hall, daffodils and tulips from my own garden that were blooming early this year, when I heard them talking in the living room. Their voices carried through the house with the casual cruelty of people who believed they were having a private conversation. I just hope she doesn't drag this out, Alicia was saying. You know how emotional older women can get about change. She'll be fine, Cory replied. Mom's always been practical. Dad used to say she was the most sensible woman he'd ever met. Still, moving can be traumatic at her age. Maybe we should look into places that offer transitional counseling. Transitional counseling? Like I was a trauma victim who needed professional help to accept being discarded by my own family. I've been thinking, Alicia continued, and I could hear the excitement building in her voice. Once she's settled, we could throw a housewarming party, really christen the space as ours. I've already been looking at caterers. A housewarming party? To celebrate my exile? That's a great idea, Cory said. We could invite everyone, your parents, my colleagues, all our friends who've never been able to visit because, he trailed off, but the implication was clear, because I'd been in the way. Because Gracie was always hovering, Alicia said. I mean, she's sweet, but having your mother-in-law around constantly isn't exactly conducive to adult relationships. Hovering. I've been living quietly in my own home, maintaining it, improving it, staying out of their way as much as possible. Apparently, existing in my own space constituted hovering. The master suite will be amazing once we expand it, Alicia continued. We can take over her sewing room, maybe add a walk-in closet and a spa bathroom. I've been dreaming about a soaking tub with a view of the garden. My sewing room, the space where I'd spent countless peaceful hours creating quilts for church fundraisers, baby blankets for new grandchildren in the neighborhood, Halloween costumes for Cory when he was small.
They were already planning to erase it, to turn it into another shrine to their comfort. And that back bedroom would make a perfect nursery, Cory added, close to the master but not right next door, good for when we finally start trying for kids. The back bedroom, where Thomas had slept for 6 months after his first minor stroke, when climbing stairs became difficult, where I'd cared for him through his recovery, where we talked about our future, our dreams for retirement, our hopes for grandchildren. They wanted to fill it with their own dreams while erasing every trace of mine. "We should probably start shopping for furniture soon," Alicia said. "I want everything to be perfect for the housewarming." That's when something inside me snapped. I set down the vase of flowers with deliberate care and walked into the living room, where they were sprawled across the furniture Thomas and I had chosen together 30 years ago. "When is this housewarming party?" I asked pleasantly. They both jumped like children caught with their hands in the cookie jar. "Oh, Gracie!" Alicia's face flushed pink beneath her expensive foundation. "We were just planning ahead." "For after you move," Cory added quickly. "You know, getting excited about having our own space."
I see. I sat down in the wingback chair that had been Thomas's favorite reading spot. "And you've already planned the menu?" "Well, not exactly," Alicia stammered. "Just preliminary ideas." "What about invitations? Have you started a guest list?" "Mom, it's just talk," Cory said, but his voice carried the defensive tone he'd used as a child when caught in a lie. "Of course it is." I smiled at them both, the same smile I'd used when he was 7 and tried to convince me the broken lamp had fallen on its own. Just like knocking out walls and expanding the master suite is just talk. The silence that followed was electric with tension. "We're trying to be excited about our future," Alicia said finally, her voice taking on a wounded quality. "Is that so wrong?" "Not at all," I replied. "Planning is important. In fact, I've been doing some planning myself." "Oh," Cory leaned forward, relief evident in his posture. "Found some places you want to tour?" "Something like that." I stood up, smoothing my skirt with hands that were steadier than they'd been in weeks. "I've found exactly what I need." "That's wonderful, Mom. Where?" I looked at my son, this man I'd raised to be honorable, who'd somehow learned to see kindness as weakness and loyalty as convenience. "You'll find out soon enough," I said, "but I think you'll be very surprised by my choice." "Why can't you just tell us now?" Alicia asked, frustration creeping into her voice. "Because," I said, walking toward the stairs, "some surprises are worth waiting for." As I climbed to my bedroom, I could hear them whispering frantically below, probably wondering if I'd overheard their conversation, trying to decide if they needed to do damage control. They had no idea that the damage was already done, and that Grace Woodall had some surprises of her own planned. That night, I lay in the bed I'd shared with Thomas for 28 years, staring at the ceiling and listening to Cory and Alicia's muffled voices drifting up from the living room below. They were probably strategizing, worried about what I'd overheard, trying to figure out how to smooth things over without actually changing their plans. But I wasn't thinking about their damage control. I was thinking about something Thomas had told me years ago, during one of our rare arguments about money. "Gracie," he'd said, "you underestimate what we've built here. You think too small about what's possible." He'd been right then, and he was right now. I'd been thinking like someone who had limited options, someone who had to accept whatever scraps of consideration were thrown my way. But Thomas hadn't raised a woman who accepted scraps. He'd raised someone who knew how to build something beautiful from nothing. The next morning, after Cory left for a weekend golf tournament and Alicia departed for a spa retreat with her college friends, I sat down at my computer with a cup of coffee and opened a browser window. The cursor blinked at me like a question mark, waiting to see what I would ask of the world. I started with the practical questions: property values in our neighborhood, real estate market trends. The house Thomas and I had bought for $127,000 in 1991 was now worth something that made my breath catch. According to 3 different real estate websites, comparable properties in our historic district were selling for between $750,000 and $950,000, depending on condition and updates. $900,000. More than 7 times what we'd paid for it, enough to buy something extraordinary, something that would make Cory's threat to evict me seem like the petty power play it really was. But where? I'd lived in the same town my entire adult life. The idea of relocating felt both terrifying and thrilling, like standing at the edge of a cliff with wings I'd never tested. I typed best places to retire abroad and spent the next hour reading about Costa Rica, Portugal, France, beautiful places with reasonable costs of living and welcoming expat communities. Then, almost without thinking, I typed luxury real estate Italy and fell into a rabbit hole that changed everything. Villa Serenita appeared on my screen like something from a dream. Nestled in the rolling hills of Tuscany, just outside a medieval town called Montalcino, it was an 8-bedroom stone mansion with cypress-lined drives, terraced gardens, and views that stretched to the horizon. The listing photos showed rooms with frescoed ceilings, a kitchen that belonged in a cooking magazine, and terraces where you could watch the sunrise paint the countryside in shades of gold and amber. The price made me dizzy, 680,000 euros. At current exchange rates, roughly $750,000, less than what my own house was worth. I stared at the screen for a long time, my coffee growing cold as I absorbed what I was looking at. Thomas and I had dreamed of visiting Italy someday, when he retired, when we had time. Tuscany, he used to say, where they invented the good life. It had been a fantasy, nothing more. But fantasies had a way of becoming possibilities when you stopped accepting other people's limitations on your life. I picked up my phone and dialed the international number listed on the real estate website. It was early afternoon in Italy, a reasonable time to call. Pronto, Agenzia Bella Corte, answered a voice with accented English. Hello, I'm calling about Villa Serenita in Montalcino. Is it still available? Ah, sì, yes, absolutely. This is Lucia Burnett. May I ask where you are calling from? The United States, North Carolina specifically. Wonderful. We have many American clients. Villa Serenita is a very special property. Are you familiar with the area? Not yet, I said, surprising myself with the confidence in my voice. But I'd like to learn everything about it. For the next 30 minutes, Lucia walked me through details that made the villa sound even more extraordinary than the photos suggested. Original frescoes from the 16th century, a wine cellar carved into the hillside, gardens designed by a student of the great landscape architect Pietro Porcinai, solar panels and modern heating systems that respected the historic character while providing contemporary comfort. The family selling has maintained it beautifully, Lucia explained. But their children live in Milano now, no interest in country life. They want it to go to someone who will love it as they have. What would the buying process look like for an American? I asked. Very straightforward, actually. We handle international purchases regularly. You would need to establish an Italian bank account, but we can arrange that. The legal process takes perhaps 60 to 90 days once we have an offer. 60 to 90 days? Cory had given me 6 weeks to disappear quietly into some retirement facility. I could have a Tuscan villa in the same time frame. Could we arrange a virtual tour? I asked. Of course. When would be convenient for you? As soon as possible. We scheduled the tour for Monday morning. My time, Monday evening hers. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the phone like it might disappear, taking this impossible opportunity with it. But the phone was real, and so was the villa, and so was the growing certainty that Grace Woodall was about to make the boldest decision of her life. I spent the weekend researching everything I could about buying property in Italy, about living as an expatriate, about the practical details of relocating a life across an ocean. The more I learned, the more possible it became. Italy welcomed foreign buyers. The region had established English-speaking services for international residents. The cost of living was reasonable, even luxurious, compared to what I'd been spending maintaining a house for ungrateful family members. But it was the photographs that kept drawing me back. The way the light fell across ancient stone walls. The olive groves that had been tended by careful hands for centuries. The promise of morning coffee on a terrace where no one would ever again suggest that people my age needed to be managed rather than celebrated. By Sunday night, I'd made a decision that would have terrified the Grace of a week ago. But that Grace had still believed that family loyalty meant accepting whatever treatment she was offered. This Grace understood that sometimes the people who should value you most are the ones who take you most for granted. And sometimes, the only way to teach them your worth is to take it somewhere it will be properly appreciated. Monday morning, I woke before dawn and made myself coffee with hands that shook slightly from excitement rather than fear. In 3 hours, I would see my future home. By evening, if everything went as I hoped, I would own a piece of Tuscany. Cory and Alicia were still asleep, probably dreaming of housewarming parties and renovation plans. They had no idea that Grace Woodall was about to purchase her own housewarming gift. A villa in Italy where no one would ever again tell her to find her own place. The virtual tour exceeded every expectation I dared to have. Lucia guided me through Villa Serenita with her phone, showing me rooms that looked like they belonged in architectural magazines. Soaring ceilings with original wooden beams. Windows that framed the Tuscan countryside like living paintings. A master suite with a private terrace overlooking vineyards that stretched to the horizon. The kitchen was updated last year, Lucia explained, panning across granite countertops and professional-grade appliances. But they kept all the original stonework and maintained the traditional feel. I found myself leaning forward, studying every detail. The breakfast nook with built-in seating, the pantry that was larger than most people's bedrooms, the herb garden just outside the kitchen door, ready for someone who understood how to nurture growing things. "It's perfect," I said, and meant it completely. "I think so too," Lucia agreed warmly. "Shall we discuss next steps?" Within an hour, I had a purchase timeline that made my head spin with possibility. Lucia would send the formal offer documents by email. I would need to wire a deposit of €50,000, roughly $55,000, to demonstrate serious intent. If the sellers accepted, we could close within 8 weeks. 8 weeks. Cory had given me 6 weeks to find somewhere appropriate for someone my age. I'd found somewhere appropriate for someone who deserved to be treated like royalty. After we hung up, I sat in my empty house. Cory was at work, Alicia at another yoga session, and called my financial advisor, Clark Saul. He'd been managing our investments since before Thomas died, and I trusted him to tell me the truth about what I could afford. "Grace," Clark's voice was warm with genuine affection. "How are you holding up?" "Better than I've been in months," I said honestly. "Clark, I need to discuss my financial position, all of it." "Of course. When would you like to come in?" "Today, if possible. I'm making some major life changes." There was a pause. "That sounds significant. Is everything all right?" "Everything's about to be perfect," I said. "I'm buying a villa in Italy." The silence on his end lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. "Italy," he repeated finally. "As in Europe?" "As in Tuscany. I need to know exactly what I can afford." "Grace, this is, well, it's certainly a change. Let me move some appointments around. Can you be here at 2? Clark's office was in a restored antebellum mansion downtown, the kind of building that reminded you that some things improve with age rather than becoming obsolete. I'd been there dozens of times over the years, but always with Thomas, always following his lead in financial discussions. Today, I walked in alone, wearing my best dress and carrying myself like someone who owned the world. "Grace," Clark stood as his secretary showed me in, "you look different somehow, energized." "I feel different," I said, settling into the leather chair across from his mahogany desk. "Tell me about my assets, Clark. Everything." For the next hour, Clark walked me through numbers that painted a picture of wealth I'd never fully comprehended. Thomas's life insurance policy, which had been substantial.
The proceeds from selling his construction business, which had been more successful than I'd realized. 35 years of careful investments and retirement savings that had grown beyond my wildest dreams. When he finished, I stared at the final figure on his computer screen, $1.8 million in liquid assets, plus whatever I could get from selling the house. $2.5 million, I said slowly, testing how the words felt in my mouth. Potentially, yes, Clark confirmed. Your husband was very smart about money, Grace, very protective of your future. He wanted to make sure you'd never have to depend on anyone else. Thomas had always handled our finances, insisting he enjoyed the research and planning while I focused on other things. I'd been content to trust his judgment, never realizing exactly how well he'd provided for me. What would I need to live comfortably in Italy? I asked. Clark pulled up information on his computer, made some calculations. Tuscany isn't cheap, but it's reasonable compared to major American cities. For a comfortable lifestyle, probably $60,000 to $80,000 annually. Your portfolio could generate that indefinitely without touching the principal. And if I wanted to buy this villa? For 680,000 euros, you could pay cash and still have over $1 million in assets remaining, more than enough to live very well indeed. I thought about the photographs I'd been studying for days, morning coffee on ancient terraces, gardens where I could grow vegetables and herbs that would taste like sunshine, neighbors who would appreciate a woman who understood how to create beauty instead of treating her like an inconvenience. Clark, I said, I want to wire 50,000 euros to an Italian real estate agency as a deposit. How quickly can we arrange that? Clark studied my face carefully. Grace, this is a very big decision. Have you discussed it with Cory? Maybe we should— No, I interrupted firmly. This is my decision, my money, my life. I don't need anyone's permission to live it. Clark nodded slowly. You're absolutely right. I apologize. Old habits from when Thomas made most of the financial decisions. Thomas is gone, I said gently but firmly. I'm not.
We spent another hour working out details. International wire transfers, currency exchanges, establishing relationships with Italian banks. By the time I left his office, I had a clear path to ownership of Villa Serenità and a timeline that would shock everyone who thought they knew what Grace Woodall was capable of. That evening, I cooked dinner for 3 as usual, herb-crusted salmon with roasted vegetables, one of Cory's favorites from childhood. As we ate, they chattered about their weekend plans, their social calendar, their ongoing renovation dreams for my house. I've been thinking about the timeline, Alicia said, cutting her salmon into precise, tiny pieces. 6 weeks might be rushing things for you, Gracie. Maybe we should give you until the end of March. How generous! An extra 2 weeks to arrange my own exile? That's thoughtful, I said, but 6 weeks will be perfect. I've already found exactly what I need. Really? Cory looked up from his plate, surprised. That was fast. What did you decide on? It's a surprise, I said, refilling their wine glasses with a Chianti that would soon taste much better in its country of origin. But I think you'll find it very appropriate for someone my age. The next 2 weeks passed in a surreal dance of preparation and pretense. While Cory and Alicia continued planning their takeover of my life, I was quietly orchestrating my escape to something far beyond their imagination. My offer on Villa Serenità was accepted within 48 hours. The sellers, Lucia explained, were charmed by my story and pleased to know their family home would go to someone who would appreciate its history. They'd even agreed to leave some of the antique furniture, pieces that had been in the villa for generations. They said, Lucia told me during one of our daily calls, that a woman who understands gardens will understand how to honor the past while creating her own future. I spent my mornings researching everything about my new life: Italian language apps, cultural guides, expatriate blogs written by Americans who'd made similar moves. I learned about permesso di soggiorno, the residence permits I'd need. I found English-speaking services in nearby Siena. I even located a wonderful woman named Nora Baker who ran a welcome service for international residents, helping with everything from bank accounts to finding housekeepers. But it was the afternoons that tested my acting abilities. Every day, Cory and Alicia would return from their respective activities and update me on their plans for my house. The contractor came by today, Cory announced on Thursday, settling into the kitchen with a beer. He thinks we can definitely open up that wall between the dining room and living room. It'll be expensive, but worth it for the flow. How expensive? I asked, genuinely curious about how much they planned to spend renovating the house they'd stolen from me. Probably $15,000, Alicia said, joining us with her usual post-workout smoothie. But it'll add so much value. Open concept is everything these days. $15,000 to tear down a wall that had separated two perfectly functional rooms for over a century? The irony wasn't lost on me that they were discussing spending more on destruction than most people made in months. What about the master suite expansion? I asked. That's the exciting part, Alicia's eyes lit up. We're going to take over your sewing room and the guest bathroom, maybe even push into the hallway closet. Custom walk-in closet, spa shower, maybe even a small sitting area by the window. My sewing room, where I'd spent countless peaceful hours creating things of beauty. They wanted to turn it into a shrine to Alicia's wardrobe. Sounds lovely, I said. When do you plan to start? As soon as you're settled, Cory said. We don't want to put you through the chaos of construction. How considerate. They'd wait until I was safely exiled before beginning their renovation celebration. Speaking of settling, Alicia said, have you scheduled any tours yet? I'd be happy to come with you, help you evaluate the options. That's sweet of you, I replied, but I prefer to handle this myself. I've always been independent that way. Of course, she said quickly. I just meant for support. These transitions can be emotional. Emotional, as if I were a fragile creature who might break under the stress of change, rather than a woman who was about to make the most empowering decision of her life. That weekend, they hosted a dinner party for 6 of their closest friends. I was invited to join, though it was clear I was expected to play the role of charming hostess before my convenient disappearance. Grace makes the most amazing roasted chicken, Alicia told their guests as I served the meal I'd spent all day preparing. Oh, you're moving? Asked Kelly Sutton, one of Alicia's yoga friends. Where to?
Somewhere more appropriate for my age, I said with a smile that made Cory shift uncomfortably in his chair. One of those lovely senior communities, Alicia added quickly, with organized activities and social opportunities. How nice, Kelly said politely, though her expression suggested she was imagining her own future exile to organized craft time and early bird dinners. After dinner, while I was loading the dishwasher, I overheard them in the living room discussing their post-Grace renovation timeline. We should have everything done by summer, one of Cory's friends was saying. Perfect timing for outdoor entertaining. That's the plan, Cory replied. We're thinking of throwing a big housewarming party in July. Pool, catering, the works. Will your mom be able to visit? Someone asked. Oh, I'm sure she'll be busy with her new lifestyle, Alicia answered smoothly. Retirement communities keep people very active. Busy with my new lifestyle. She had no idea how accurate that statement would prove to be. The following Monday, I received the call I'd been waiting for. The final paperwork was approved. Villa Serenità would officially become mine in 3 weeks, with possession on February 28th, exactly the deadline Cory and Alicia had given me to vacate their lives. Congratulations, Grace, Lucia said, her voice warm with genuine pleasure. You are now the owner of one of the most beautiful properties in Tuscany. When will you be arriving? March 1st, I said. I'll be spending my first night in my new home exactly when I promised I'd be out of my old one. That evening, Cory found me in the garden, checking on the early spring bulbs that were just beginning to push through the soil. You seem different lately, Mom, he said, settling beside me on the stone bench Thomas had built 20 years ago. Lighter somehow, more at peace with everything. If only he knew. I've made peace with a lot of things recently, I said, which was completely true. I'm glad. I was worried you were upset about the move, but you seem genuinely okay with it. I'm better than okay, I told him. I'm excited about what comes next. That's great to hear. And hey, once you're settled, we'll visit all the time. Maybe Sunday dinners, holidays, you know. Sunday dinners.
They'd visit me like a duty call, bringing their children someday to see the grandmother they'd warehoused for their convenience. "We'll see," I said. "I might be busier than you expect." 3 days later, the moving truck would arrive to collect the few precious items I was taking to Italy. In 4 days, I would board a plane to Rome. In 5 days, I would wake up in Villa Serenità and start the greatest adventure of my life. But for now, I sat in my garden, surrounded by the beauty I'd created, listening to my son make plans for visiting the retirement facility he assumed I'd chosen, and smiled at the delicious irony of it all. Grace Woodall was about to get exactly what she'd been told to find, her own place. It just happened to be a Renaissance villa in one of the most beautiful places on Earth. February 25th dawned crisp and clear, the kind of winter morning that promised spring was just around the corner. I stood at my bedroom window, watching Cory load his golf clubs into his BMW for what would be the last time I'd see him perform this Saturday ritual. Alicia had left earlier for a weekend spa retreat in Asheville with her college sorority sisters, chattering about massages and facials while completely oblivious to the fact that their comfortable world was about to shift on its axis. The moving truck would arrive at noon. My flight to Rome was scheduled for Monday evening. In 72 hours, I would be sipping wine on my own terrace in Tuscany, while they discovered that Grace Woodall had outplayed them at their own game. I'd been methodical in my preparations, selecting only the most precious items to accompany me across the Atlantic. My grandmother's silver tea service, which had survived the Depression and 2 world wars. The oil painting of the Blue Ridge Mountains that Thomas had commissioned for our 25th anniversary. 3 boxes of photographs that told the story of our life together and Cory's childhood. My mother's cookbook collection, annotated in her careful handwriting with family recipes I couldn't bear to leave behind. Everything else, the furniture, the kitchen equipment, the accumulated possessions of 40 years of marriage, would be sold with the house. Let Cory and Alicia have their open-concept dreams. I was moving towards something infinitely better. The house sale had closed yesterday, faster than even my realtor had expected. The buyers, a young couple expecting their first child, had fallen in love with the place exactly as it was. They'd offered $875,000 cash with a 60-day closing that aligned perfectly with my Italian timeline. "Mrs. Woodall," the wife had said at closing, tears in her eyes, "thank you for taking such beautiful care of this house. We promise to love it the way it deserves." Like some people, I'd thought, but didn't say. At exactly noon, the Atlantic Moving Company truck rumbled up my driveway. 3 men emerged, professional and efficient, ready to pack my carefully selected possessions for their journey to a new life. "Mornin', ma'am," said the crew chief, a weathered man named Gary, who moved with the confidence of someone who'd relocated hundreds of lives. "You're the one going to Italy." "That's me," I said, signing the papers that would send my belongings on a cargo ship to the port of Livorno, while I flew ahead to receive them. "First time overseas?" he asked, as his crew began loading boxes marked with cheerful yellow stickers. "First time doing anything just for myself," I replied honestly. Gary grinned. "Good for you. Life's too short to live it for other people." As they worked, I walked through my house one final time, touching surfaces Thomas and I had chosen together, remembering meals cooked in this kitchen, holidays celebrated in these rooms, quiet evenings spent reading by the fireplace that had anchored our living room for 3 decades. The house held our history in every corner, but I was taking the important parts with me anyway. The memories, the love, the knowledge that we'd built something beautiful together. The new owners would create their own memories here, just as I would create new ones in Villa Serenità. By 3 p.m., the truck was loaded and pulling away, carrying my past toward my future. I stood in my empty house, surrounded by echoes and dust motes dancing in the afternoon light, and felt something like vertigo at how quickly a life could be dismantled when you put your mind to it. My phone buzzed with a text from Alicia. "Having the most amazing facial. Can't wait to hear about your house tours when I get back tomorrow." House tours? If only she knew that I'd already found my dream home and would be living in it before she finished unpacking her spa weekend luggage. I typed back, "Can't wait to share my news. You're going to be very surprised." Another message arrived immediately. "Ooh, mysterious. Did you find somewhere perfect?" "Even better than perfect," I replied. "Everything is arranged." That evening, I had dinner at Romano's, the Italian restaurant where Thomas and I had celebrated every anniversary for 20 years. The owner, an elderly man from Naples, remembered me despite the months since I'd last been there. "Signora Grazie," he said warmly, "you look different tonight. Happy." "I'm moving to Italy," I told him, and watched his weathered face break into a delighted grin. "Brava! Which region?" "Tuscany, near Montalcino." "Ah, paradise!" He clapped his hands together. "The wine, the food, the beauty. You will love it there. And they will love you." He insisted on sending over a bottle of Brunello di Montalcino, the famous wine of my new region, and sat with me while I savored my last meal in North Carolina. We talked about Italy, about new beginnings, about the courage it takes to choose yourself when everyone expects you to choose convenience. In Italy, he told me, we have a saying, "Chi va piano va sano e va lontano." It means slow and steady wins the race. But sometimes, he winked, you must go very fast to win your freedom. Sunday passed in a strange suspended animation. I cleaned the empty house one final time, swept floors that would soon echo with other people's footsteps, and locked doors that would open to someone else's dreams. By evening, everything was ready. My suitcases sat by the front door like sentinels guarding my escape route. I'd written 2 letters, one for Cory, one for Alicia, explaining my decision and my timeline. Not because I owed them explanations, but because I wanted them to understand that Grace Woodall was a woman who kept her word. They'd told me to find my own place by the end of February, and I had. It just wasn't the place they'd expected. As I settled into my empty bedroom for the last time, I could hear a car pulling into the driveway. Cory, returning from his golf weekend, probably eager to tell me about his game and his plans for the following week. He had no idea that by the time he woke up tomorrow morning, his mother would be somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, flying toward a life that would make his renovation dreams seem small and petty by comparison. Tomorrow night, I would fall asleep in Villa Serenitita, in a bed I'd chosen, in a house I owned completely, in a country where Grace Woodall could be exactly who she was meant to be. Tonight, I fell asleep to the sound of my son moving around downstairs, probably wondering why the house felt so quiet, so empty. He was about to find out. Monday morning arrived with the kind of February sunshine that hinted at spring's approach. I woke before dawn in my empty bedroom, dressed carefully in my traveling clothes, a navy blue dress that had always been Thomas's favorite, paired with comfortable shoes for the long journey ahead, and went downstairs to make coffee one last time in my kitchen. The silence felt different now, not the comfortable quiet of a well-loved home, but the expectant hush of a stage set for the final act. My taxi would arrive at 3 p.m. to take me to the Charlotte airport. My flight to Rome departed at 6:30 p.m. By tomorrow evening, I would be in Tuscany. I heard Cory's alarm go off upstairs, followed by the sound of the shower running. His Monday morning routine, unchanged for years. Soon, Alicia would return from her spa weekend, glowing with expensive treatments and weekend relaxation, ready to continue planning their takeover of my life. But this Monday morning would be different from all the others. I placed the 2 envelopes on the kitchen counter, where they couldn't be missed, each one addressed in my careful handwriting. Then I sat at the breakfast nook with my coffee, watching the sun rise over the garden I'd tended for 32 years, waiting. Cory appeared in the kitchen at exactly 7:15, as punctual as always, wearing his real estate office uniform of khakis and button-down shirt. He moved toward the coffee maker with the automatic movements of someone following a routine he could perform in his sleep. "Morning, Mom," he said without looking up from pouring his coffee. "Sleep well?" "Wonderfully," I said truthfully. "Best sleep I've had in months." He turned then, perhaps hearing something different in my voice, and froze when he saw the envelopes on the counter. "What are those?" he asked. though something in his expression suggested he already knew they weren't birthday cards. "Everything you need to know," I said calmly, standing up and smoothing my dress. "But the short version is this. You told me to find my own place, and I did." Cory's face cycled through confusion, wariness, and the first hints of genuine alarm. He picked up the envelope with his name, turning it over in his hands like it might explode. "Mom, what's going on? Where are your things? Why does the house feel so empty?" "Because it is empty," I said. "I moved out yesterday while you were golfing." The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking away the seconds of his shock. Cory tore open the envelope with trembling fingers, his eyes scanning the pages I'd written in my neatest handwriting. "Villa Serenita," he read aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. "Montalcino, Tuscany, Italy." 8 bedrooms, I confirmed helpfully. Terraced gardens, wine cellar, views of the countryside. Quite appropriate for someone my age, don't you think? "You bought a house in Italy?" His voice cracked like he was 13 again, trying to process something beyond his comprehension. "I bought a villa in Italy," I corrected, "with cash. Closed on Friday. I take possession this afternoon, local time." Cory stared at me like I'd announced I was moving to Mars. But how? Where did you get the money?" "From selling this house," I said matter-of-factly. $875,000, more than enough for Villa Serenita and a very comfortable life in Tuscany. "You sold the house?" The words came out strangled, desperate. "My house? You can't sell my house." "I sold my house," I corrected gently. "The one I've lived in for 32 years, maintained with my own hands, and legally owned until 3 days ago. The transfer you arranged for tax purposes wasn't quite as ironclad as you believed." The sound of a car door slamming announced Alicia's return from her spa weekend. Perfect timing, as always. "Oh, good," I said, checking my watch. "Now you can read your letters together." Alicia burst through the front door with the energy of someone who'd spent the weekend being pampered and was ready to resume managing other people's lives. "I'm back," she called out, her voice echoing through the empty house. "Gracie, Cory, why does everything sound so hollow?" She appeared in the kitchen doorway, her face still glowing from professional treatments, and stopped short when she saw Cory holding papers with shaking hands and me standing calmly by the window. "What's going on?" she asked, her yoga instructor serenity beginning to crack around the edges. "Read your letter," I suggested, nodding toward the envelope that bore her name. Alicia picked it up with the same wariness Cory had shown, as if she sensed that whatever was inside would change everything. She read quickly, her face going progressively paler beneath her expensive spa glow. "Italy," she said finally, her voice high and tight. "You moved to Italy?" "I'm moving to Italy," I corrected. "My flight leaves in 8 hours.
But what about us?" Cory asked, and for the first time since this conversation started, he sounded like the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. "Where are we supposed to live?" It was exactly the question I'd expected, and exactly the question that revealed everything wrong with their thinking. Not where would I live, not how would I manage, but where would they live now that their free housing was gone? "I'm sure you'll figure something out," I said kindly. "You're both capable adults with good jobs and excellent credit. You'll be fine." "Fine?" Alicia's voice climbed toward hysteria. "Gracie, you can't just leave us homeless. We don't have money for a down payment. We've been saving, but with real estate prices the way they are." "You've been saving," I repeated slowly, letting the words hang in the air. "For what?" They exchanged the kind of panicked look that spoke volumes. They'd been saving for their own future while living rent-free in my house, eating my food, using my utilities. They'd been treating me like a landlord who didn't charge rent while simultaneously planning to evict me for their convenience. "This is insane," Cory said, beginning to pace the empty kitchen. "Mom, you can't move to Italy. You don't speak Italian. You don't know anyone there. What if something happens to you?" "I'll learn Italian," I said. "I'll meet people. And if something happens to me, At least it will happen while I'm living my life instead of being warehoused for other people's convenience. We never said anything about warehousing you, Alicia protested. Sunset Hills, I said simply. Organized activities for people my age. Some were more appropriate for someone at my stage of life. Ring any bells? The silence that followed was thick with the weight of their own words being reflected back at them. Mom, please, Cory said, his voice breaking as the full scope of his situation began to sink in. Don't do this. We can work something out. You can stay. We'll find somewhere else to live. It was the first time in months he'd asked me to stay instead of demanded I leave. But it was too late. The offer came from desperation, not love, and I'd spent too many years accepting scraps of affection from people who should have cherished me. Cory, I said gently, do you remember what you said when your father died? You promised you'd always take care of me. You said family was everything. His face crumpled. I remember. So do I. Every word. And for 7 years, I believed you meant it. I trusted you with my life, my future, my security. The first time it became inconvenient, you threw me away. We didn't throw you away, Alicia protested, mascara beginning to streak down her cheeks despite the expensive waterproof formula. We were trying to help you transition. You told me to find my own place, I interrupted. So I did. Villa Serenità is lovely this time of year. A car horn honked outside. My taxi right on schedule. I picked up my purse and the small carry-on bag that contained my passport, my banking information, and everything I needed for my new life. That's my ride, I said. Mom, wait. Cory followed me to the front door, his voice desperate. Please don't go. Not like this. We can fix this. I turned to look at him one last time, memorizing his face, trying to see past the panic to the little boy who used to tell me I was his favorite person in the whole world. I love you, Cory, I said. I will always love you. But I won't let you treat me like a burden anymore. I raised you to be better than that. I know, he whispered. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know you are. But sorry doesn't give me back the months I spent planning my own disposal. Sorry doesn't erase the feeling of being unwanted in my own home. Alicia appeared behind him, her spa glow completely destroyed by tears and panic. Gracie, please. We'll do better. We'll change. You'll change because you have to now, I said, stepping onto the porch I'd swept every weekend for 32 years. Your free ride is over, but I'm not interested in being a lesson in gratitude. I'm interested in being happy. The taxi driver was already getting out to help with my bags. A kind-faced woman who smiled like she'd done this 1,000 times before. Airport, she asked. International terminal, I confirmed. Behind me, I could hear Cory and Alicia talking in urgent whispers, probably trying to figure out if they could stop me somehow. If there was some legal recourse or emotional manipulation they hadn't tried yet. There wasn't. I was 70 years old, mentally competent, financially independent, and legally free to live wherever I chose. The fact that my choice surprised them, inconvenienced them, or hurt their feelings was unfortunate but irrelevant. Ma'am, the taxi driver was holding the car door open. Ready?
I took one last look at the house where I'd been happy for 30 years and miserable for the last 22 months. New owners would move in next month and fill it with fresh love and laughter. Cory and Alicia would find somewhere else to live and hopefully learn to value what they had instead of taking it for granted. And I would be in Tuscany, discovering what came after a lifetime of putting everyone else's needs before my own. Ready, I said, and climbed into the car. As we pulled away from the curb, I saw Cory in the rearview mirror, standing in the doorway of what used to be my house, his shoulders shaking with what might have been tears or rage or simple disbelief. Alicia was on her phone, probably calling her parents to negotiate emergency housing while they figured out what to do next. I felt a moment of sadness for the pain I was causing them, but it was a clean sadness, uncomplicated by guilt or regret. They had created this situation with their entitlement and casual cruelty. I was simply declining to be their victim. 3 months into my Italian life, I woke to the sound of church bells echoing across the Tuscan hills and the gentle cooing of doves nesting in the ancient eaves of Villa Serenita. The morning light filtered through gauzy curtains in my master bedroom, casting dancing shadows on the terracotta floors that had been walked by countless generations before me. I stretched luxuriously, savoring the simple pleasure of waking naturally instead of to an alarm, of having nowhere to be exactly where I wanted to be. My Italian was improving daily. What had started as tentative pointing and apologetic smiling had evolved into actual conversations with shopkeepers, restaurant servers, and my neighbors in the medieval village of Montalcino. Signora Benedetta from the farmhouse down the hill had taken me under her wing, a retired literature professor who spoke 4 languages and made the most extraordinary ribollita I'd ever tasted. She'd invited me to her weekly book club where a rotating group of locals and expatriates gathered to discuss everything from Dante to contemporary fiction over wine and cheese that tasted like small miracles. "Grace," she'd said during our first real conversation, "you have done something very brave. Not many people have the courage to choose themselves at our age." Our age. Coming from Signora Benedetta, who was 76 and still tended her own olive grove, the phrase sounded like a badge of honor rather than a limitation. I'd established routines that felt both foreign and perfectly natural. Morning espresso on my terrace while watching the mist lift from the vineyards. Long walks through the countryside where every turn revealed another postcard-perfect vista. Afternoons spent reading in the shade of my pergola or browsing the weekly market in Montalcino, where vendors called out greetings in rapid Italian and broken English. The villa had filled with treasures discovered during my explorations, handmade ceramics from a local artisan, fresh flowers from my own cutting garden, books in both English and Italian from the wonderful libreria in nearby Siena. My grandmother's silver tea service now graced the antique dining table that came with the house, creating a perfect bridge between my old life and my new one. But it was the silence from America that had been the most telling indicator of how completely my world had changed. In 3 months, I'd received exactly 3 communications from Cory. 2 frantic emails during the first week, both going to my spam folder because I wasn't ready for that conversation. And a stilted birthday card last month, 2 weeks late, with a generic message hoping I was adjusting well. The birthday card had arrived on a day when I was feeling particularly settled in my new life. I'd spent the morning at a watercolor class taught by an English artist who'd been living in Tuscany for 15 years. She was my age, vibrant and funny, with paint-stained fingers and stories of reinventing herself after her children left home. After my divorce, she'd told the class, dabbing ultramarine blue onto her canvas, I sold everything and moved here with 2 suitcases and a determination to discover who I was when I wasn't being someone's wife or mother. Best decision I ever made. The birthday card from Cory had felt like an artifact from a previous life, a reminder of obligations I no longer carried. I'd read it once, felt a brief pang of sadness for the relationship we might have had, and then placed it in a drawer where it couldn't disturb the peace I'd worked so hard to build. My phone rang as I was finishing my morning espresso, the sound still startling in the tranquil quiet of my terrace. The number showed an international code I didn't recognize, though something about it seemed familiar. "Pronto," I answered, pleased that the Italian greeting came naturally now.
Mom! The voice was thin, stretched across an ocean, and what felt like years of accumulated regret. "Hello, Cory." I set down my espresso cup and watched a hawk circle lazily over the valley below. My son sounded older somehow, worn down in a way that transcended the poor international connection. "Mom, thank God. I've been trying to reach you for weeks. I had to hire someone to track down your number." He'd hired someone. The phrase hung between us like an admission of how far apart we'd drifted. He'd paid a stranger to find his own mother, rather than simply respecting my need for space. "I've been here," I said simply, "living my life." "In Italy," his voice carried a weight I couldn't quite identify. Not disapproval exactly, but something close to awe mixed with disbelief. "In Tuscany?
Mom, we need to talk. Really talk. Things have been difficult since you left. I settled back in my chair, watching cypress trees sway in the morning breeze. Difficult? What's happened? There was a long pause filled with the crackling static of international communication and what sounded like Cory gathering courage for whatever he needed to say. Alicia left, he said finally, 2 months ago. She went back to her parents, said she couldn't handle the stress of our situation. The words should have shocked me, but instead I felt only mild curiosity about the details. Alicia had been the architect of my exile, convinced she could curate their perfect life by removing inconvenient obstacles. That she'd abandon ship when their circumstances changed was entirely predictable. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. Not sorry that Alicia was gone, but sorry that Cory was learning these lessons about love and loyalty the hard way. "Are you?" His voice carried a bitter edge. "Sorry, I mean. You never liked her." It was true, but not for the reasons he probably thought. "I'm sorry you're in pain. Breakups are never easy, even when they're necessary." "We're getting divorced," he said quietly. "Her lawyer already contacted mine about dividing assets. Turns out we don't have many assets to divide." Of course they didn't. They'd been living beyond their means for years, using my house as collateral for a lifestyle they couldn't sustain independently. "Where are you living?" I asked. "A 1-bedroom apartment in the city. It's all I can afford on my salary alone." Another pause. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I know I don't have the right." Here it comes, I thought. The request for financial assistance, for a loan to tide him over until he could get back on his feet. "You can ask," I said, "but I may not be able to help." "I don't want money," he said quickly. "Well, I mean, I could use money, but that's not why I'm calling. I want to understand. I need to understand what I did that was so terrible that you had to move to another continent to get away from me." The question caught me off guard with its raw honesty. I'd expected manipulation or guilt or anger, but not this genuine confusion about the consequences of his choices. "You told me to find my own place," I said simply. "I know, but I didn't mean... we were trying to help you transition to something more manageable." "More manageable for whom?" Silence. "Cory, do you remember what you said about people my age? About how I needed somewhere more appropriate with organized activities? We were trying to look out for your well-being." "No," I said firmly. "You were trying to clear me out of your way. There's a difference." I could hear him breathing across the connection, and I wondered where he was calling from. His cramped apartment, probably, counting the cost of this international call against his reduced budget. "You're right," he said finally. "We were selfish. I was selfish. I convinced myself we were doing what was best for you, but really, we were doing what was easiest for us." It was the first real acknowledgement I'd heard from him, the first admission that my feelings and my autonomy had been casualties of their convenience. "Why are you calling me now, Cory?" "Because I miss you," he said, and his voice broke on the words. "Because I've spent the last 3 months realizing how much of my life was built on the assumption that you would always be there to catch me when I fell. And because I want to know if there's any way I can earn your forgiveness." Forgiveness. I turned the word over in my mind, like a stone I'd found on the beach, examining its weight and texture. 3 months ago, I'd been furious, hurt, determined to prove that Grace Woodall was more than a convenient safety net for other people's dreams. Now, sitting on my terrace, overlooking one of the most beautiful valleys in the world, surrounded by a life I had built entirely for myself, the anger felt like something that belonged to a different person. Not because what Cory had done was acceptable, but because I no longer needed his validation to know my own worth. "What would forgiveness look like to you?" I asked.
I don't know, he said honestly. A conversation, maybe. A chance to apologize properly. To tell you how proud I am of what you've done, even if it scares me. Proud? That was a word I hadn't expected. Mom, you sold everything and moved to Italy. At 70, most people are worried about their medication schedules, and you're living like some kind of international woman of mystery. I laughed, surprising myself. Is that how you see me?
I see you as someone I clearly never understood, he said. Someone who was stronger and braver than I ever gave you credit for. Someone who deserved better from me. We talked for another hour, filling in the details of our separate lives. He told me about his struggles, his new humility, his plans to rebuild his life on his own terms. I told him about my Italian lessons, my new friends, the peace I'd found in my villa among the vines. I love you, Mom, he said finally. I know I did a terrible job of showing it, but I do love you. I love you too, sweetheart, but love isn't enough if it's not paired with respect. I know, I'm learning that the hard way. After we hung up, I sat on my terrace for a long time, watching the afternoon light paint the hills in shades of gold and amber. A text from Signora Benedetta arrived. Cena tonight. My garden, 7 o'clock. Bringing that American woman from Siena you'll adore. I typed back. Perfect. I'll bring wine. As the sun set over Tuscany, painting the sky in colors that would make a master painter weep, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here. Cory's demand that I find my own place had been meant as a dismissal, a convenient way to clear me out of his path. Instead, it had been the greatest gift anyone had ever given me. I'd found my own place, all right. Not in some retirement facility where I could be managed and contained, but in one of the most beautiful places on earth, where every day brought new possibilities and every sunset promised another tomorrow to fill as I chose. At 70, I'd learned that life doesn't end when your children don't need you anymore. It doesn't end when people start referring to your age like a limitation. It ends only when you stop believing in your own capacity for joy, for growth, for adventure. Villa Serenity had been waiting for me all along. I just needed to be pushed off the cliff of other people's expectations to discover I could fly. Tomorrow, I would wake up in my Italian villa, make espresso in my sun-filled kitchen, and continue writing the most beautiful chapter of my life. Tonight, I would have dinner with friends who valued my company, in a garden where no one would ever again suggest that people my age needed to be anywhere but exactly where they chose to be. Grace Woodall had found her own place, and it was magnificent.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.